York, this is Democracy Now!
With today's tragedy, the number of people who've lost their lives on the Mediterranean in 2019 is now up to 900. We're just a few away now from reaching 1,000 people dying at sea for the 6th year in a row. And this is particularly concerning because on the central Mediterranean, the route from Libya to Europe, the rate of death is rising sharply.
At least 40 people are feared dead after a boat carrying dozens of refugees and migrants capsized off the coast of Libya. We'll go to Geneva to speak with the UN Refugee Agency, then to Brazil to look at the devastating fires in the Amazon rainforest.
What we see now is an unprecedented destruction in the Amazon, and the fires this year had an increase of 80%, and they are a direct result of Bolsonaro's policy and rhetoric. Basically, he gave a green light for illegal deforestation.
And we go to the Middle East, where Israel's carried out airstrikes in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Authorities in Iraq and Lebanon say they view the strikes as declarations of war.
From now on, we will face Israeli drones in Lebanon's skies. We will bring down Israeli drones when they enter Lebanon's skies.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Trump administration plans to shift over $270 million of federal funds, including at least $155 million from FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund, to pay for its highly contested Remain in Mexico policy. The funds would pay for temporary courts on the southern border to hear cases of asylum seekers who've been forced to return to Mexico while their cases proceed through the U.S. legal system. The money will also be used to add nearly 7,000 more spaces to immigration prisons. The news comes as Puerto Rico is bracing for Tropical Storm Dorian, which could make a direct hit on the island and strengthen into a hurricane later today. Puerto Rico's Governor Wanda Vazquez has declared a state of emergency for the island. On Tuesday, President Trump used the impending storm to take a jab at Puerto Rico, tweeting, "Wow. Yet another big storm heading to Puerto Rico. Will it ever end? Congress approved $92 billion for Puerto Rico last year, an all-time record for its kind for anywhere," unquote. San Juan Mayor, vocal Trump critic Carmen Yulín Cruz responded by saying in a CNN interview, quote, "Trump's behavior, his lack of understanding is ludicrous. 3,000 Puerto Ricans did not open their eyes this morning because this racist man did not have it within him to do his job. So get out of the way and let people who can do the job get the job done," the San Juan mayor said. The 3,000 people is referring to the death toll from 2017's devastating Hurricane Maria. In other immigration news, the Washington Post is reporting President Trump has ordered his staff to speed up the construction of his border wall before the 2020 election, even if it means breaking the law. Trump reportedly told aides he will pardon them if they face any legal repercussions related to the request, which could include seizing private land, expediting billions of dollars of construction contracts, and ignoring environmental regulations. The Trump administration has reportedly ended the Medical Deferred Action Program, which allows immigrants with serious health problems to stay in the United States for up to 2 years beyond the terms of their visas to receive critical treatment. Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey said, quote, "The administration is now literally deporting kids with cancer," unquote, and that the change would, quote, "terrorize sick kids who are literally fighting for their lives." The ACLU of Massachusetts has vowed to fight the policy change in court. Rescue teams are searching for at least 40 refugees who are feared dead after a boat carrying dozens of migrants capsized Tuesday morning off Libya's coast. According to the Libyan Coast Guard, some 65 passengers, mostly from Sudan, were rescued with the help of local fishermen. The Associated Press reports at least 5 people died, including a woman and child from Morocco. An estimated 900 people have died so far this year while crossing the Mediterranean Sea to reach Europe. Last month, another shipwreck off the Libyan coast claimed about 150 lives, including many children. We'll have more on the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean with Charlie Yaxley, spokesperson for the UN Refugee Agency, after headlines. In the occupied Palestinian territories, the Gaza Strip is on alert after 2 bombs killed 3 Hamas police officers at checkpoints Tuesday night. The deaths were reported by the Interior Ministry. Palestinian officials blamed the attacks on Israel, but other sources say a group linked to the Islamic State might be responsible. Tuesday's blast followed an Israeli attack on a Hamas military post earlier in the day, and after separate air attacks Monday on what the Israeli military says was a Hamas compound. Israel launched the air raid in response to cross-border rocket fire, though Hamas denied any involvement. In Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to ask the Queen to suspend Parliament, increasing the likelihood of a no-deal Brexit. Johnson will reportedly request Parliament be closed from mid-September to mid-October, meaning lawmakers who oppose a no-deal exit from the European Union would have very limited time to pass legislation supporting any other measures. The UK is scheduled to leave the European Union on October 31st. Back in the United States, 16 accusers of the deceased serial sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein appeared in a New York City federal court Tuesday to describe their experiences of sexual abuse at Epstein's hands. Jeffrey Epstein was represented by an empty chair next to 3 of his lawyers. Epstein was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell earlier this month of an apparent suicide, and prosecutors requested charges against him be dropped. But U.S. District Judge Richard Berman decided to allow survivors of Epstein's abuse testify against him. This is attorney Gloria Allred speaking outside the courthouse.
It took a lot of courage for them to write the statements and to have their voice heard, and I really commend them for being here, because Jeffrey Epstein's death, whether it was a suicide or murder, does not end the case. Does not end their fight for justice. It does not end their feeling that they were manipulated and victimized, and that they were child victims of Mr. Epstein. So today they spoke truth to power. They spoke truth to what happened to them.
The Washington Post is reporting Attorney General William Barr is planning a $30,000 holiday party at Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. The event is reportedly not an official Justice Department party and will be paid for directly by Barr. Critics say, although the event would not be a legal violation, it skirts an ethical line. Maryland and the District of Columbia previously argued in a lawsuit foreign governments and other entities patronize the Trump Hotel in order to curry favor with the president, putting other businesses at a disadvantage, a violation of the Emoluments Clause. A federal judge temporarily blocked Missouri's contested 8-week abortion ban Tuesday, one day before it was set to take effect. The ban, which does not include exceptions for rape or incest, would penalize abortion providers who perform the procedure after 8 weeks before many people are even aware they're pregnant. A lawsuit filed by Planned Parenthood and the Missouri ACLU challenging the law is currently being argued. Purdue Pharma and its owners, the Sackler family, have offered to settle the more than 2,000 lawsuits against them for their role in the opioid crisis for $10 to $12 billion. The sum includes $3 billion from the Sackler family fortune. The deal was reportedly discussed last week by Purdue's lawyers and includes a plan for Purdue to declare Chapter 11 bankruptcy before restructuring into a for-profit public benefit trust that would allegedly serve the many plaintiffs suing the company. The Sackler family would relinquish ownership of Purdue under the deal. The news came out the same day as the landmark ruling in Oklahoma that found Johnson & Johnson helped fuel the state's opioid crisis. The company was ordered to pay over $500 million. Purdue Pharma was also sued by Oklahoma, but settled before any trial took place. Independent Senator 2020 hopeful Bernie Sanders has released a plan to protect independent journalism and end the consolidation and corporate control of media outlets. His plan includes ending federal approval of major media mergers, giving employees an opportunity to have ownership in news outlets, increasing funding for local and independent news, and strengthening antitrust regulations to stop tech giants like Facebook and Google from, quote, cannibalizing, bilking, and defunding news organizations. Sanders notes President Trump's assault on the press has further threatened the media landscape. In other news about Senator Bernie Sanders, the Vermont senator picked up his first labor endorsement from the United Electrical, Radio and Machine Workers of America. The group also backed Sanders' run in 2016. Sanders recently announced his workplace democracy plan, which would seek to double union membership, bolster collective bargaining, end right-to-work laws, and protect worker pensions. A 17-year-old Palestinian student who was scheduled to start his freshman year at Harvard University was denied entry into the United States last week and had his visa revoked. Ismail Ajawi told the Harvard Crimson he was interrogated by immigration officials upon his arrival at Boston's Logan Airport on Friday. They reportedly questioned his religious practices and searched his phone and computer, revealing posts by friends that were critical of U.S. policy. Ajawi, who was to attend Harvard University on a full scholarship, was ultimately sent back to his home in Lebanon. PEN America's Summer Lopez said in a statement, quote, the idea that Ajawi should be prevented from taking his place at Harvard because of his own political speech would be alarming. That he should be denied this opportunity based on the speech of others is downright lawless, she said. After spending 2 weeks aboard a solar-powered 60-foot racing yacht, world-renowned 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg will arrive in New York City today, where she'll begin a months-long tour of the Americas and attend the UN Climate Summit in New York and Santiago, Chile. Thunberg does not fly, chose to make the journey from Europe to the U.S. by boat due to the heavy carbon footprint of air travel. This is Greta Thunberg speaking from the yacht yesterday.
We're currently doing between 20 and 25 knots. Last night we hit 30 knots, and we are about 300 miles away from Nova Scotia, and it's very rough with very high waves, and yeah.
Crowds of supporters and reporters are expected to greet Greta Thunberg in Manhattan this afternoon. And the legendary peace activist Frances Crowe has died at the age of 100 in Northampton, Massachusetts. Over the past 7 decades, Frances Crowe has been arrested countless times protesting war, nuclear weapons, nuclear power, and the construction of new pipelines. When once asked how many times she'd been arrested, Frances Crowe said, "Not enough."
I've done everything that I know of to do, and all I have left is my body, and to put it in the way to say no.
In 2005, Democracy Now! Interviewed Frances Crowe about how she set up a pirate radio station in her backyard to broadcast Democracy Now!
So finally, we said, we'll try my backyard. So I put a pole up, and we were on the air. And And, you know, I've never broken a law that I felt better about it.
Thanks to the efforts of Frances Crowe, Democracy Now! Is now heard daily on WMUA at the University of Massachusetts. Frances Crowe died on Tuesday at the age of 100, surrounded by her family and friends. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. At least 40 refugees and migrants are feared dead after a boat carrying dozens of people across the Mediterranean Sea en route to Europe capsized Tuesday morning off the coast of Libya. According to the Libyan Coast Guard, some 65 migrants and refugees, mostly from Sudan, were rescued with the help of local fishermen. The Associated Press reported at least 5 people were confirmed dead, including a woman and child from Morocco, whose bodies were recovered near the western town of Homs, 75 miles east of Tripoli. With Tuesday's tragedy, the number of migrants and refugees who've lost their lives in the Mediterranean in 2019 is up to 900. Just last month, about 150 people, including children, mostly from Africa, drowned off the coast of Libya in a separate shipwreck. According to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, rescue operations for the latest migrant shipwreck continue to be underway. The final death toll may be even higher. This latest disaster comes as far-right European leaders like the Italian Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of the Interior, Matteo Salvini, continue to criminalize refugees and migrants as well as humanitarian aid workers who often lead search and rescue missions in the Mediterranean. This June, police in Italy arrested Carola Rackete, the 31-year-old German captain of the Sea-Watch rescue ship, after her vessel collided with an Italian border police boat when she attempted to dock at an Italian port. And in 2017, Pia Klemp, also a member of Sea-Watch, was arrested at the same port and charged with assisting so-called illegal immigration. Klemp is currently awaiting trial and faces up to 20 years in prison if convicted. For more, we go to Geneva, where we're joined by Charlie Yaxley, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, global spokesperson for mixed migration, Mediterranean and Africa. Welcome to Democracy Now! Charlie Yaxley, can you explain what just happened, this latest shipwreck, and what the casualties are?
Well, once again, we're mourning yet another tragic incident resulting from people trying to flee the war and violence in Libya. The rescue operation is still underway, but from what we understand from our teams who are there on the ground, speaking with survivors, a boat left in the early hours of yesterday morning, very soon came into distress, and appears that 40 people have now drowned on the Mediterranean, and this is just the latest in a series of drownings for people taking these similar journeys to this one. Each time we do see an outpouring of public sympathy expressed from all corners, but we're calling now for those sentiments to be translated into meaningful action. UNHCR has proposed a way forward. There's a number of ways we can improve search and rescue capacity at sea and get refugees out of Libya so they don't take these boats in the first place, but the situation cannot continue as it is.
So explain who was in this ship before before the shipwreck, and explain why they couldn't get to land.
Well, this group is very similar to the kind of groups we often see departing from Libya. It's a mixed group of people, of refugees and of migrants. Around a third are from refugee-producing countries. So in the east and west of Africa, we currently have more than 15 unresolved conflicts and insecurity in different areas, particularly in places like Eritrea and Somalia and Sudan in the east, Mali and Burkina Faso in the west. Their people there are fleeing ongoing fighting by armed groups and are in need of refugee protection. At the same time, we do see secondary movement from countries neighbouring those countries because their asylum systems are in need of strengthening, and there needs to be strategic development assistance. When people don't feel safe and don't feel they're able to make the most of economic opportunities that will allow them and their families to survive, we see a rising trend of people putting their lives in the hands of smugglers and traffickers who commit a range of human rights abuses and are responsible for putting people on these flimsy and unseaworthy boats that have often little hope of reaching dry land.
An Italian court ruled 2 weeks ago that the Spanish humanitarian ship Open Arms, which was waiting off the Italian island of Lampedusa, carrying nearly 150 rescued migrants and refugees, should be allowed to dock in Italy. This was in defiance of a ban by Italy's far-right Interior Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini. In a statement issued by his office, Salvini said, quote, "I continue and will continue to deny the landing to those who claim to bring illegal immigrants always and only in Italy." Salvini also said he'll continue to defend Italy's borders and say, quote, "no to disembarking." Can you talk about the significance, what this means for migrants at sea?
Well, this is a concerning and regrettable trend of increasing hostility, not only towards the people taking the crossings, but also the people who seek to help them. In the past few years, NGO rescue operations have saved countless lives, thousands and thousands of lives. But the number of NGOs able to do that right now has diminished to just a small handful due to different legal and logistical restrictions being placed on them. Their role needs to be acknowledged and supported and not criminalized nor stigmatized. There are suggestions by some that these NGOs collaborate with smugglers and aid illegal migration, but we see no evidence for that. At different times in the last year, there have been no NGO boats operating search and rescue on the central Mediterranean, and yet actually the average number of departures has increased. And when we look more closely at the situation, it becomes clear that it's the push factors that people are leaving behind: the war, violence and human rights abuses, the escalating violence in Libya since April. That has a much bigger motivating factor than any kind of potential pull factor of the presence of NGO boats.
Pia Klemp, the German captain of a refugee rescue ship who now faces prison time in Italy after rescuing hundreds of refugees in the Mediterranean, has refused to accept an award given to her in July on behalf of the city of Paris. Klemp wrote on Facebook last week that Paris Mayor Ana Hidalgo and the city of Paris, quote, "want to award me a medal for my solidarian action in the Mediterranean Sea because our crews work to rescue migrants from difficult conditions on a daily basis. At the same time, your police are stealing blankets from people you force to live on the streets while you raid protests and criminalize people that are standing up for rights of migrants and asylum seekers," Pia Klemp said. She was awarded the Grand Vermeil Medal last month alongside Carola Rackete, a fellow member of the refugee rescue organization Sea-Watch. 2 years ago, Klemp's ship was seized by authorities in an Italian port, and she was eventually charged with assisting so-called illegal immigration. She's currently awaiting trial, facing up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Charlie Yaxley, if you could comment on the stakes for people who are trying to help those who might die at sea. And are.
Well, I think the frustration Caesar expresses there understandable. I mean, NGO boats are picking up people who are in a desperate state. Let's be clear, people don't take these boat journeys. They are aware that these journeys could often be fatal, and nobody puts their own lives and the lives of their families at risk in that way unless they feel they're better off on the water than on the land. So when NGOs pick people up and rescue them in the sea, their ordeal is not then over. They're then stranded at sea for days on end, while states have often engaged in a political back and forth, trying to see who can most shift responsibility onto others. I think what's needed now is for the toxicity in the political debate to be removed and a more objective perspective to come in here. The number of arrivals reaching European shores are really down significantly. We're no longer in a situation like we saw in 2014 and the immediate years that followed, where we saw incredibly high numbers. We're back to the pre-crisis levels, but yet deaths remain broadly the same. So we're no longer in a crisis of arrivals here. We're in a crisis of deaths, and there needs to be some soul searching about whether Europe is willing to engage with people who are seeking asylum on their doorstep.
You have said 1 in 6 or 1 in 7 people die at sea. Can you explain where they are dying? What is the route they're taking? And talk about why Libya is such a critical place for them and where they're coming from.
Well, the routes through North and Sub-Saharan Africa are very, very complex, but typically it's where the smugglers and traffickers are able to carry out their actions with impunity. It's in places that are beset by conflict. It's in places where states often no longer have strong rule of law. They're not able to hold people, the smugglers and traffickers, accountable. And the human trafficking is just one aspect of this. Those networks are often similarly involved in drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and also oil trafficking as well. So any attempt to really address this situation will have to look at this holistically and develop a way to hold the smugglers and traffickers to account using the courts of law. And for those that are known to have sanctions against them, many of these people are known, and there are ways this can be done. Last year there were sanctions placed against some of the smugglers and traffickers in Libya. But until that happens, at the same time we need to address the root causes. There needs to be greater efforts to broker peace so that people are not forced to flee their homes in the first place. Now Libya has become a center point for all this because of the violence that has plagued the country since 2011. Different militia groups have been allowed to take root, and smuggling and trafficking has become big business. So until we see a more holistic approach that involves strengthening security structures for states, holding smugglers and traffickers to account, and brokering peace, we're likely to see more boat crossings in the future.
So let me ask you about the 350 migrants stranded on a rescue ship in the Mediterranean Sea who disembarked in Malta on Friday after 6 European countries agreed to accept them. The Ocean Viking, which is run by French charities Doctors Without Borders and SOS Méditerranée, had been in a tense standoff for 2 weeks as it remained in international waters after being denied permission to dock in Italy or Malta. Most of the passengers on the Ocean Viking were from Sudan and had been rescued in 4 separate missions. The ship was carrying around 100 children, most of them unaccompanied. The migrants now will be relocated to Germany, France, Romania, Ireland, Portugal, and Luxembourg. But that picture of this ship at sea being denied entry reminded me of back in World War II in the United States, the ship of 900 Jews that was not allowed to dock in the United States, and the ship then went back and many of those perished. Your comment on the refusal of countries to take in people who face death, and also what the European Union is doing.
Those images and the story that those people told, is sadly all too familiar. Regardless of whether these rescued people come from refugee-producing countries or were initially migrants, at the hands of these smugglers, they suffer beatings, torture, prostitution, rape, and some are sold as slaves. So they've really gone through incredibly traumatic experiences, and even if they may not be in need of asylum, may well be in need of other forms of humanitarian protection. Now, for the European countries on the Mediterranean. It is true that they have borne a disproportionate amount of responsibility in the last few years for receiving refugees and migrants rescued on the Mediterranean. But what we need now is a system in place that gives shipmasters clarity and predictability about where they can immediately dock people after they've been rescued. There are already some seeds of hope on how a system could work. UNHCR and IOM have proposed a model. It requires states to come forward in solidarity with those Mediterranean states and with refugees and agree to a certain quota of people they'll be willing to receive in such incidents. The discussions about this have begun. There were recent meetings in Paris and Helsinki on this, and there was a consensus that action needs to be taken, that this high loss of life on the Mediterranean cannot continue. But, time is running out for many people in Libya who are in facing violence and conflict. In detention centres in Libya, we have around 3,000 people who are close to conflict areas and at risk of being caught up in the violence. A system for disembarking rescued passengers is needed now, so that the system is already in place and we're not left in this perpetual crisis, boat by boat, ad hoc approach.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Charlie Yaxley, for being with us, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, global spokesperson. When we come back, we look at the devastating fires in the Amazon and the indigenous resistance to Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Stay with us.
Born in the middle of the afternoon in a horse-drawn carriage down the old A5. The big 12-wheeler shook me bed. You can't stay here, the policeman said. You'd better get born in someplace else. Move along, get along, and move along, and get along, and go move shift. Born in a common by a building site where the ground was rotted by the trail of wheels. The local Christians said to me, "You lower the price of property. You'd better get born in someplace else. Move along, get along, move along, get along, and go move shift." 6 in the morning out in Inchicore, the guards came through the wagon door. John Mahan was arrested in the cold, a travelling by just 10 years old. You'd better get born in someplace else. Move along, get along, move along, get along, and go move shift. Mary Joyce is living but decided the road, no halting place and no fixed abode. The vigilantes
Go Move Shift, performed by Christy Moore. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn to Brazil, where fires continue to rage in the Amazon, new drone footage shows the widespread smoke and fires gathering strength. A vast plume of smoke has spread over South America and the Atlantic Ocean, visible from space. The fires are also destroying large swaths of land in Bolivia. As the devastation continues to spread, far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro said on Tuesday he would reconsider accepting a $22 million offer from the G7 nations to help fight the fires in the Amazon, but only if French President Emmanuel Macron withdrew what he called insults made against him.
Look, first of all, Mr. Macron should withdraw the insults he made against me. First, he called me a liar. And then, from the information that I have, he said our sovereignty over the Amazon was an open question. So in order to talk or accept anything from France, which might be with the best possible intentions, he's going to have to withdraw these words. Then we can talk.
Facing global pressure from environmentalists, President Bolsonaro pledged in an address to the nation to mobilize the army to help combat the blazes, but many blame his policies for the spread of the fires. Bolsonaro has worked to deregulate and open up the Amazon for agribusiness, logging and mining since he came into office in January. The fires are unprecedented in recorded history. Environmentalists say most of the fires were deliberately set by illegal miners and cattle ranchers. So far this year, there have been nearly 73,000 fires in Brazil, with over half of them in the Amazon region, an 83% increase from the same period last year. As the world reacts to the Amazon's destruction, indigenous Brazilians are on the front lines of the fight to save their land. Indigenous leader Sonia Guajajara said in a statement, quote, "We're putting our bodies and our lives on the line to try to save our territories. We've been warning for decades about the violations we've suffered across Brazil. The predatory behavior of loggers, miners, and ranchers has been getting much worse under the anti-indigenous government of Jair Bolsonaro, who normalizes, incites, and empowers violence against the environment and against us," they said. Well, for more, we're joined by Maria Luisa Mendonça, director of the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights in Brazil, visiting scholar at the City University of New York Graduate Center. Welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Maria. If you can talk about what exactly, how this all happened, why the Amazon is on fire at this point, and talk about the G7 offer to help, President Trump not going to the climate meeting of the G7, that empty seat there with the other world leaders around him. He said he was meeting with India and Germany, but Prime Minister Modi and Chancellor Angela Merkel were in the two seats next to the empty seat, so he wasn't meeting with them.
Yes, I think Trump and Bolsonaro, both of them, they don't believe in climate change, and they are very close to industries that are the main cause of climate change, the oil industry, agribusiness, mining. So Bolsonaro gave a green light for illegal deforestation of the Amazon. The current environmental minister in Brazil used to do lobby for mining companies and has said that Brazil should allow mining exploitation in indigenous land. Bolsonaro is very close to the agribusiness sector, and he said that Brazil should expand monocropping of soy in the Amazon. So the oil industry and agribusiness, which relies on chemical inputs based on fossil fuels, are the main cause of climate change. And in Brazil, with Bolsonaro's policies cutting funding for agencies that monitor deforestation, he just a few weeks ago fired the head of the National Space Research Agency that was putting out information about deforestation. So basically, he gave a green light for the illegal destruction that we see now.
And explain the setting of the fires all in one day. I mean, the maps are incredible right now of the rainforest, because you see the indigenous areas, they are green, indigenous people protecting their areas, and then the areas outside of that on fire.
Yes.
What did the loggers do?
Yes. Well, the Amazon is not empty land, of course, right? There are about 1 million indigenous people living in the Amazon, and they have been protecting the land for many, many generations. But what we have seen is that there is more pressure to expand the so-called agricultural frontier in Brazil, in the Amazon. And usually what happens is that we have local land grabbers that put fire in the land. They take the timber, they do these illegal activities, and then you see either cattle ranching or monocropping of soy. So this is the cycle of destruction. And now this year, of course, the situation is much more dramatic. We have seen over 80% of increasing of deforestation in comparison to last year.
And the European Union, I mean, many people said it was pathetic what they were offering, 20 million, but that they were. And then the politics of Bolsonaro saying, no, you couldn't even deal with your own Notre Dame Cathedral on fire, and then insulting the French president and his wife.
Yes, Bolsonaro is really happy with the destruction of the Amazon. So he's going to come up with any type of excuse just not to take responsibility for what's happening. And so I think that the international community needs to call for a boycott of the main commodities produced by agribusiness: beef, soy, sugarcane, and timber. I think this is the only message that Bolsonaro is going going to that will have any type of impact, because he doesn't believe in climate change. So I think that, and also giving aid to the Bolsonaro administration, I don't think that is going to help very much. I think we need to support indigenous communities, small farmers that are protecting the land and who produce over 70% of the food for internal markets.
Several thousand indigenous women gathered in the capital, Brasilia, this month to protest the policies of Bolsonaro. Hundreds occupied a health ministry building as they demanded the government respect indigenous rights in the Amazon. This is Joana Wapichana, the first indigenous woman elected to the Brazilian Congress.
Protest is an important act to defend the rights of indigenous peoples. We are under a series of systematic violent attacks. There's the lack of demarcation of indigenous lands, the issue of health, education. This is all in danger. We are fighting against privatizing for a fairer and quality education.
So if you can talk about what she said and the significance of the indigenous women gathering and protesting.
Yes, that was very important. They had a very large protest just a few days ago, and the indigenous communities in Brazil are very well organized, and they are calling the international community to pay attention, to keep monitoring the situation. And we also have seen, for example, recently a UN report saying that industrial agriculture is a main cause of climate change, and one of the ways to prevent that is to protect indigenous communities that have been protecting the land for many generations. So, climate change and protecting indigenous communities are key factors to deal with the crisis that we have now.
You have Bolsonaro pulling Brazil out of being the host of the UN Climate Summit in December, and so Chile is going to take on that responsibility. The illegal logging, those that are burning the forest, talk about the day they set fire to the Amazon. It's not as if this doesn't happen at other times, to say the least, at a much smaller degree. But what happened on this one day?
Yeah, what we have seen now is that apparently there was a coordinated effort from illegal loggers and land grabbers in the Amazon. They called the Day of the Fire. And that happened just a couple of weeks ago. And so now the police is investigating actually some WhatsApp groups that were coordinating those activities, those illegal activities. So also we have seen reports saying that there was more rain this year than last year, although this is the dry season. So we cannot explain why the level of destruction, and there are so many more fires this year in comparison to last year.
So can you talk about Bolsonaro putting his refusal to first accept the money, but also to deal with the opening up the rainforest for business, putting his critique in colonialist terms, saying this is not your house, this is our house, we get to do with it what we want?
Yes, well, the thing is, at the same time that he says that, he's implementing austerity measures and opening up key sectors of the Brazilian economy to privatization. He wants to privatize, for example, the national oil company, public banks, electricity companies. So he's opening up our lands for mining exploitation, for agribusiness. The agribusiness sector, the marketing of those commodities is pretty much controlled by large transnational corporations. So we're not talking about development of the Brazilian economy. Agribusiness, they promote destruction. This is not about development. They produce just a few crops for export. They don't generate jobs. The jobs in plantations are horrible jobs. We have several cases of slave labor in those plantations. So if we really want development, we need to protect our natural resources, because to have a productive agricultural system, we need to protect the soil, the water sources, we need to protect biodiversity, and we need to transform our food system, because agribusiness is a main cause of climate change.
And the agribusiness is specifically?
Yes, well, mainly what they produce is beef, sugarcane, soy, and timber. So that's why I think we need to call for a boycott of those 4 products from Brazil. I think this is the only message that is going to have an effect in terms of pressuring the Bolsonaro administration, because he doesn't believe in climate change, and he is implementing policies that are giving a green light for deforestation.
Well, Maria Luisa Mendonça, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Director of the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights in Brazil, visiting scholar at City University of New York Graduate Center. When we come back, we look at the suspected Israeli airstrikes in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Authorities in Iraq and Lebanon say they view the strikes as declarations of war. We'll speak with Rami Khouri, Senior Policy Fellow at the American University of Beirut. Stay with us. Oh Me, Oh My by Sun Little. Here is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Tensions are mounting across the Middle East following a series of suspected Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. The Lebanese president, Michel Aoun, likened the recent Israeli attacks to a declaration of war. Israeli drones bombed targets in Lebanon on both Sunday and Monday. Meanwhile, some Iraqi lawmakers are calling on the United States to fully withdraw its troops following a series of Israeli air raids. The Fatah coalition said it considered Israel's actions to be, quote, a declaration of war on the Iraq and its people. Israel has only claimed responsibility for an attack on Syria Saturday, which they say targeted an Iranian-operated base that was preparing to launch a drone assault on Israel. For more, we go to Boston, Massachusetts, where we're joined by Rami Khouri, Senior Public Policy Fellow at American University in Beirut, non-resident Senior Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Middle East Initiative. Rami Khouri is a columnist at The New Arab. His latest article headlined The Dangerous New Landscape of Arab-Israeli Warfare. Rami Khouri, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. What is that landscape and what has happened over these last few days?
What's happened over the last few days is a convergence of a trend that has been going on for about 50, 60 years in the Middle East, with Israel asserting its philosophy that it must always be militarily stronger than any combination of foes around it. The United States officially supports this policy, and the Israelis will use any military or subversive or surreptitious means, or any means they feel they have to use, assassination, bombing, whatever, to preserve their security, and that their security is more important than the security of anybody else around them. That's been going on for 50, 60 years, and they've been assassinating people and bombing things all over the Middle East. What's happened this week, which is unusual, is that there were attacks in 3 or 4 places almost simultaneously by the Israelis, and attacks against the Israelis. So they attacked in Lebanon, 2 different places, 2 different targets in Beirut and the Bekaa Valley. They attacked in Iraq. They have threatened Iran, of course, the whole time, and they were attacked by people Palestinians from Gaza. So a simultaneous war, not a all-out war, but a simultaneous series of attacks against 4 or 5 different targets by the Israelis is something new and quite troubling, both for the Israelis and for the Arab parties that are being attacked. And this is something I think that is going to continue because traditional conventional warfare, as has happened between 1947 and 2006, is no longer really possible because Hezbollah has essentially achieved a level of deterrence with the Israelis, with Hezbollah's significant technical capabilities and missiles and communications and other things. So an Israeli-Hezbollah war, which happened several times with great destruction, mostly in Lebanon, is not going to happen again, probably. Both sides want to avoid it. So the landscape of warfare has shifted to drones and missiles and viruses and things of that nature. But the fact that there are so many different groups in the Middle East that have achieved higher levels of technical proficiency with their military defensive and offensive capabilities should be troubling for the Israelis. And, of course, the Israelis are going to try to figure out new ways to overcome this, which only exacerbates the likelihood that there will be continued and expanding destruction all over the region without resolving any of the core issues, ironically.
On Sunday, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah spoke after the suspected Israeli drone attacked Beirut.
What happened last night was an attack with a suicide drone on a target in the southern suburbs of Beirut in Lebanon. This is a breach of the rules of engagement established after the August 2006 war, the first clear and significant breach. We will do everything to stop something like this course. We will do everything to stop such a course. From now on, we will face Israeli drones in Lebanon's skies. We will bring down Israeli drones when they enter Lebanon's skies. If Israel kills any of our brothers in Syria, we will respond to this killing in Lebanon and not in Shabaa farms.
And on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded to Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader.
I heard what Nasrallah said. I suggest to Nasrallah to calm down. He knows well that Israel knows how to defend itself and to pay back its enemies. I want to tell him, and to Lebanon, which hosts this organization that aspires to destroy us, and I say it also to Chief of Iran's Quds Force, Qassem Soleimani, watch what you say, and moreover, be careful about what you do.
So, explain the responses here, Rami Khoury, the Israeli Prime Minister, and before that Nasrallah.
Well, the significant historical development, as I mentioned, is that Hezbollah over the last 30 years or so, with significant Iranian aid, has been able to develop a very high level of technical military proficiency, offensive, defensive, camouflage, training, logistics, in all fields of military warfare, which has essentially created a situation of mutual deterrence on the Israeli-Lebanese border. Israel, between the 1970s and 2006, could come in at will at Lebanon with tanks and aerial attacks and missiles, do anything it wanted. They sent assassination teams. Ehud Barak, one of their prime ministers, came into Beirut disguised as a woman and assassinated some Palestinian people. So they can't do that anymore as easily because there is a serious ability by Hezbollah with tens of thousands of its rockets and missiles to inflict huge damage on Israel if Israel attacks Lebanon again with conventional warfare. So the talk by Nasrallah and by Netanyahu is partly political posturing, but it's partly a reality that both sides have struggled now to come to terms with, which is they can't conventionally attack each other, partly because the destruction would be so terrible for both sides, mostly civilians would be killed, and partly because they probably understand deep down that there is no military resolution to this political conflict. But the critical point here is that the rules of engagement that have been in effect since 2006 have now been broken by the Israelis. And those rules said that the Hezbollah and the Israelis would do tit-for-tat attacks against each other in the area called Shabaa Farms, which is between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, which is disputed areas. The Lebanese and the Syrians both claim it's theirs. The Israelis actually occupy it. So the Hezbollah attacks against Israeli positions in Shibha Farms are done because Hezbollah can say we've attacked the Israelis, but we haven't attacked Israel proper, and Israel hits them back and says we've attacked Hezbollah, but we haven't attacked Lebanon proper. So that is over now. We'll have to see what happens. Hezbollah will definitely respond. They always do, and they'll make some kind of response in Israel at some point when they feel it's possible or appropriate, and that might be another tit-for-tat attack, and then things would quiet down. But this takes us back to the point where both sides have capabilities. They're willing and able to fight if they have to, and they will continue to do this fighting with these limited attacks, probably. But the new really important thing is the fact that Israel is having to fight against 4 or 5 or 6 simultaneous foes now. And they attacked Lebanon twice, they attacked Syria, they attacked Iraq, they're at war with Hamas. They've talked now about maybe attacking Houthi positions in Yemen. So, and of course, behind all of this is the Israeli-American desire, now supported by Saudis, Emiratis, and some other governments in the Gulf, to do whatever they can to push back Iran. The extraordinary irony of all this is that all the American-Israeli Gulf efforts to push back the Iranians in the last 15, 20 years have only resulted in much bigger Iranian strategic relationships across the region, many of them linked with Hezbollah technical training, leading to a condition today where Israel faces at least half a dozen foes around the region whose military technical capabilities are much, much greater than they were 15 or 20 years ago, and therefore cause strategic problems for the Israelis and the Americans and some of the Gulf countries. One point is interesting. There's a report that just came out this morning that the attack against popular mobilization militias in Iraq that the Israelis presumably did came from northern Iraq in an area controlled by militias supported by the United States and supported by the Saudis. So we are seeing this incredibly complex and moving configuration of forces, relationships, bases, attack points, and you're seeing this now in 4 or 5 different countries simultaneously. And this is really the significant new landscape of warfare that we're witnessing.
And these strikes were taking place over the weekend. You also had Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, showing up at the G7 summit. Can you talk about the significance of this? And also Iran saying they're not going to meet with Trump or negotiate with the United States until sanctions are lifted.
Well, that Iranian position is perfectly logical. The Americans broke the agreement, and the Americans reimposed sanctions, so they need to roll those back and then get back to talking. They will eventually end up talking one day, that's for sure. What we've learned from the Iranian situation, and of course Hezbollah is an example of this as well, because they work closely together. If you take a strong principled position, you have some support by the international rule of law, and you take military, political, any other actions to defend yourself, and your people support you, you'll be able to hang in there and withstand any kind of pressures against you. Hezbollah has been an example of this. Now they've become the strongest Arab military force probably in the region. The Iranians have long adhered to this position, and the Iranians are essentially saying, we're willing to negotiate, but we're not willing to negotiate as subjects of imperial and colonial and racist orders being given by Trump or Netanyahu or anybody else.
Rami, I just wanted,
the big lesson recently has been, of course, the nuclear agreement under Obama, with the sanctions and the nuclear issues dealt with together, and that's the thing that has to be achieved. This would be a huge, huge setback if the Iranians and the Americans started talking, which presumably will happen. I mean, it's happened sort of indirectly now. If this happens, this is a massive setback for Netanyahu, for the Saudi leadership, for the Emirati leadership, and all of these authoritarian people in the region, the Egyptian leadership, who have been clamoring for action against Iran while
Rami Khouri,
turning
I wanted
the
to ask
states
you a
into
last question
authoritarian
I wanted
units.
to ask you a last question before we wrap up, because you're at Harvard. The 17-year-old Palestinian student who was scheduled to start his freshman year there on Friday was denied entry last week at Logan Airport. His name is Ismail Ajawi. The Harvard Crimson says he told them he was interrogated by immigration officials and that they're denying him based on what his friends have written on Facebook. We have 10 seconds. Your response.
This is part of a growing authoritarian trend. You see it in Israel and Egypt and the Gulf countries, in the U.S. and Brazil, where people use this kind of almost fascist-like control mechanism by governments to deny individuals their rights, and it won't work.
We have to leave it there, but we're going to do part 2 with you and post online at DemocracyNow.org. Rami Khouri, Senior Public Policy Fellow at American University of Beirut, now at Harvard Kennedy School's Middle East Initiative. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.